I'm as excited as everybody else to be here. Thank you very much to DCU for inviting me. I'm hoping that the day started well and we'll continue that. So I co-founded something called the Maturity Institute just over 3 years ago. And the reason a group of us in various parts of the world decided to create an institute, because it was a big decision to say we needed an institute, we all believe that most organizations at board level, and I think Pat has talked to that to some degree, they really don't understand how people connect to value. And they don't understand how people connect to value and risk. And that's a pretty serious issue. And for you, I'm sure you're all, you've experienced that. And I've experienced that as a practitioner, and I did have an HR role once. And so I could see and feel that. And moreover, those organizations that actually do get it at board level or exco level, they actually don't understand very well how to realize that value and how to assess and mitigate that risk. So there's a lot of work to do, and that's primarily why we created an institute, because we didn't see many bodies out there addressing this. Now, in order to go about dealing with this fundamental issue, our work has taken us away from corporations in the last few years and increasingly to the investment community. So my work on a day-to-day basis is actually with pension funds, investment managers, and other stakeholders in that community. And the reason we're there is because I see and we see them as huge agents of change here. Because if we can get investors talking about human capital, human governance, managing people, and how that connects to value, then that has a profound effect on CEOs, boards, and excos. And we are just starting to see that happen. Okay, so that's where we are. So where do we start? You won't see this at the back. I'll read it to you. If we're going to connect and understand the connection between people, human capital, human resources, and value, we need to know what value is. And when you start to look at what value is, nobody gives you a very good definition. They don't really they don't tell you what value is, and so we need to bottom that out. And we spend a lot of time talking about value, and our story starts around value with this book. Actually, it's called The Puritan Gift, and it's a core text for anybody that comes on our programs. And I would urge you all to have a look at it and read it. It's a fascinating book about how organizations manage themselves, and it was written by two brothers, William and Kenneth Hopper. They're both in their late 80s at this point in time. They're both fascinating people. But their starting point is looking at the Puritan migration, the Pilgrim migration to North America, that has resonance here in this room. And they started looking at how religion informed the values of the early organizations. How their religious beliefs informed how we manage organizations, and how that resonated and carried on through into the 20th century, and how it informed and drove value through what they identified as the great engine companies in America. How those values were taken to Asia post-World War II and informed a lot of companies in Asia Pacific. And really, their premise is that towards the second half of the 20th century, companies lost sight of what they were there for. They lost sight of their purpose. They lost sight of fundamentally there to serve society. And this is an interesting quote, so I'll read it to you. It says, "The paradox is that by not pursuing profitability to the exclusion of all else, the great engine companies in their golden age would achieve enormous increases in value. Whereas by single-mindedly pursuing profit, these same companies and their successors actually created less genuine, lasting wealth. Indeed, they would often destroy it." Okay. I think we have examples coming out almost on a weekly basis which talk to this. I've only got to talk about Volkswagen. Okay? There is an organization which chased a certain strategy. People behaved in a certain way. It damaged the organization and it's damaged society. It's damaged the town in which Volkswagen has their headquarters. It polluted communities. It's not a good outcome for anybody. So our underlying premise is actually those organizations that have a value motive which is societal in dimension actually generate more value for themselves. And I think Doug will talk about Unilever and how Paul Polman has driven the Unilever organisation to embrace that notion. So that's our underlying premise, is that if we are about shareholder return, we might generate good returns or good profits, but we're unlikely to maximise value. And in the long term, we're unlikely to maximise the value, and actually will erode shareholder value too. Okay. I said we talked about value. We need to get some purchase. We spend virtually a whole day talking about value. I'm going to skip through this, but let's just go with this for the time being. You work in organisations, and if we ask you the question, what's the value of your organisation, we'll probably have a very interesting discussion about what value means. Let's just, for argument's sake, say the market value of an organisation. We'll just take that as a proxy. So the market value of a business is a certain amount of money today. And what's the value of that business going to be in 1, 2, 5, 10 years' time? Now, generally speaking, we want some kind of growth. We want some kind of development of the organisation in a positive direction. But if we're going to increase value over the time, how can we do it? How do we increase value? Well, value for us is a combination of 4 things. We can increase output, so we can chase volume. VW became obsessive about volume. It wanted to overtake Toyota as the volume, the number 1 car maker in volume terms globally. It wanted to get more than 10 million cars per year. It became obsessive around that target. We can reduce cost. And I would say within our HR functions for the last 15 years, this is what we've been focusing on. Time and time again, when you talk to HR directors and you say, how do you add value? And generally they say, we take cost out of the business, including our own cost. Okay? We can increase revenue. Okay? We can find ways to drive revenue in our organisation. Or we can increase quality. And that's just not the quality of products and services. It's our brand. It's the reputation of the business. Quality is a much bigger piece to look at. And that's our value proposition. And these are all related. So, we see lots of organisations. Let's take Barclays. Jez Staley, who's the new CEO of Barclays, before he even turned up, said Barclays needs to cut jobs. Okay? Now that's quite a worrying thing for me. It's like you're not even there, and you're saying we're not cutting enough jobs. He's already telling the street, he's telling Wall Street, and he's telling the city, I'm in control. I'm going to get costs under control. My question is, who's doing the value question? And actually, I've asked the question of the analytics team at Barclays the same thing. You've just announced 15,000 job cuts, but who's doing the value equation? Who's looking at the impact of that? Are you really going to save those jobs? How much of that is going to be outsourced? How many more temps are you going to use? How many games are going to be played in your organisation to get headcount down, but ultimately you're not going to drive down costs? Fundamentally, is quality going to suffer? Okay? So that's it. It's a very simple definition of value. And by doing that, we can start to then look at how do human beings connect to these outcomes. Okay? Now, we add something to this. Now I've talked about organisations providing value to society. We have a very simple definition of societal value, and I'll read that to you as well. It says societal value is generated by producing the best quality products and services at the lowest possible cost. And cost includes any external harm, such as to the environment. Okay? A very simple definition of what we believe societal value is. That is our definition, but it's actually taken from some of our exemplars, some of the companies that we look at and say they've got this right. This is a definition of value that Toyota use. And it's a definition of value that organizations like Patagonia in the US, who make outdoor equipment and clothing. If you look at the narrative of their organization, they talk about it in these terms. It's a definition which Handelsbanken, a Swedish bank, adopt if you look at how they run their organisation. Okay? So value. We want to get our head around value. Let's start to talk about human governance. We're in a paradigm where businesses are aiming to maximise returns, generally shareholder returns. Okay? Most CEOs are still stuck in a paradigm of, I'm here to serve shareholders, I'm here to maximise returns to shareholders. Increasingly, society is changing. Society is redetermining organisational behaviour, what our organisations are for. Look at climate change. What do we want our organisations to be? We're now demanding our organisations serve society. We want organisations that have a meaningful purpose. We don't want to work or actually buy from or have organisations that are not there doing something that's going to benefit ourselves. Okay? And so we're starting to redetermine what's acceptable legally, regulatory, and in terms of cultural norms. A great example in the last week or so is SeaWorld. And if you looked at SeaWorld, SeaWorld, if you may have visited it, they put orcas on show. They have killer whales there for our entertainment. And a documentary called Blackfish, which I'm sure some of you have seen, basically showed how horrific orcas were being treated. And it's fundamentally changed our view of whether we should hold animals captive for our entertainment. The state of California went so far as to say, we're going to outlaw the breeding of orcas. Basically, effectively saying to sea, we're going to kill your business. The CEO of SeaWorld came out last week. SeaWorld said, we have now got to reimagine our business. Society has changed. We haven't adapted, we haven't shifted, we've stuck to try and maximise returns for our shareholders, but now the writing is on the wall. And we've got to fundamentally change our business, otherwise we don't have a business. So the orcas that are there are the last ones. Now, building on that, we can start thinking about human governance. Now, if you work for SeaWorld, if you watch the documentary, you'd have seen that a lot of people that worked at SeaWorld weren't particularly aligned to SeaWorld's underlying value motive. After the documentary, a lot of consumers weren't, a lot of customers weren't. And so human governance is actually about how do we align ourselves as workers, citizens, employees, or however we're connected to this. It becomes a coherent model. So one of the things we're looking for organisations is how can we reconcile providing value to society and also creating value for our own organisation. And I think many organisations today are in a very, very difficult place. They don't know how to do that. Okay. We'll try and bring this to life a little bit. Because we do external ratings, I can talk about companies a bit more freely. I'll talk about the middle one at some point. Let's pick up on some of these. I've mentioned Toyota. Toyota is one of our original exemplars. I've talked about its value motive. Its value motive is so embedded. If you go to, it tells about there was a report done by a London-based organisation called Share Action on the emissions scandal. It went to all the car companies and got them to provide some information about how they're dealing with emissions. And of the sort of 6 or 7 companies that provided feedback, they all dealt with it in a fairly defensive way. Toyota they didn't start with that. They started with their purpose. It says, since 1937, Toyota has been in business to serve society, to make a contribution to society, to make the best possible quality products and not do harm to the environment. That was its starting point, and that was just in a response to a Share Action initiative. It embeds what it does everywhere. Toyota fundamentally understands that human beings are central to long-term value. It cannot maximize its own value without maximizing the value of its people. Everybody, not just the hypos, everybody comes to Toyota has to engage their brain. The supply chain is not a supply chain, it's a value chain. It is a source of value. Everybody connected to that organization is a source of value. So we start to push out the boundaries. We start to look at human governance, not just the workforce, but everybody who can connect to value. Toyota make a similar amount of cars to General Motors, Ford, and VW, around 10 million. They're about 4 times more valuable in market value terms. I think that's an astonishing figure. And I would say to you, even if a small part of that is down to the better management of people, that's a pretty material number. And so you can start to see why we're talking to investors. Because when you look at market value of Toyota, that's the first thing we talk about. We can look at operating margin. The operating margin of Toyota is between 10 and 11%. If you look at VW, who are its closest in terms of those major global volume car makers, VW was the closest at around 6%. Now that's going to go down. because of what's happened. That's a huge number. How does Toyota manage to generate margins of over 10% and its competitors less than 5 or 6%? There's got to be something there. It's got to be connected to how it manages people. Handelsbanken is interesting. It's interesting in the context of the banking system. I'm sure you've got same issues here in Ireland. We have a major problem with our banks. They have not served society. They've destroyed value, both themselves and of society. Handelsbanken, around 40 years ago, decided to revisit its business model. And it said, we need to understand more clearly our purpose and how human beings connect to value. And if you go to Handelsbanken, it's reconciled societal value. It's there to serve the needs of local communities. Alongside that, it says we need to be the most profitable bank in the sector. Why do we need to be profitable? We need to be profitable because we need to be financially stable in order to serve the needs of society as best we can. And when you start to strip that away, you find that profits are not paid out to CEOs in the same way as its competitors. In fact, they don't pay bonuses. They pay some bonuses to a small group of people, very small group of people, and they begrudge that. They're the investment banking people. But they generally don't pay bonuses. And their long-term bonus plan is tied up. It's the same for everybody, and you can't get it till you're 60. Okay? So systemically, the systems support this long-term value creation. Handelsbanken, look at the margin for Handelsbanken. It's over 50%. Lloyd's is about 8%. Barclays is somewhere in the teens. HSBC, I think, is closest. But its operating margin makes the others look pedestrian. But fundamentally, it's in business to serve society. But its financial performance just blows everybody out of the water. Costco and Walmart, I've used Costco and Walmart. I've been using a paper that's 10 years old now. It's written by a guy called Wayne Cascio, who's a US academic. It's a fantastic analysis of an organization which puts people at the heart of the business, where business strategy and people strategy are one and the same. It's not aligned, they're one and the same. Okay? I'm not aligning people strategy, business strategy. I'm sitting around the table defining strategy, and our human beings are part of that. Okay? There's a big difference. The statistic, Costco, the paper is on Costco and Walmart. You can guess which one gets the bad press. The one statistic that comes out of that is inventory shrinkage, which is how much people, primarily how much people steal from each organization. Walmart famously don't disclose that number because they don't want to, because they know the analysts will be like, what the hell is going on? The industry average, when I looked at it, was around 2% of sales, so that's a big number, 50 billion. Sam's Club is about $50 billion organization, so 2% of 50 billion, I'm not very good at maths, so you can do the maths, or the math, and work that one out. Costco is 0.2%, 0.2%. Now that's a material number. If I'm an investor, why is that happening? Why is there a differential of that magnitude? We can start to quantify what the value consequences of managing people well and managing people, well, without a great deal of regard. Walmart manage people as a cost. Okay? They don't manage people for value. They're interested in driving cost out of the business, so they're interested in driving the human cost out of the business. I won't go. Ryanair, you know more than this about this than me. Michael O'Leary copied Southwest Airline, but he deliberately didn't copy one piece because Europeans don't do love, apparently. We don't need love. Cheap flights, that'll do. EasyJet did the same thing. But Carolyn McCall spotted earlier that that customers did matter. Human beings did matter to value. It took about 3 profit warnings for Michael O'Leary to stand up and say, well, yeah, maybe we shouldn't unnecessarily piss off our customers. So that's a nice strategy, isn't it? That's our human capital strategy. Let's not unnecessarily piss off our customers. But in order to be able to not unnecessarily piss off our customers, we've got to make sure our own people don't do that, okay? Because Southwest Airlines knew right from the start that it's their employees which drive value in their business. Okay, love matters. Look at the profitability of Southwest over the last 40 years. It continues to be a role model. Southwest, Toyota, Patagonia, Handelsbanken, Costco, they're role models. These organizations are role models. They perform well financially. They tend to outperform. But They fundamentally serve the needs of society and generate superior financial returns. Okay, let's move on, pick up the pace a little bit. So human governance, again, I'll read this for those at the back, you won't be able to read this. Human governance emerges, for us, it merges with the recognition that the organisation is committed to the never-ending pursuit of societal value through realising the full potential value of its entire human capital. Okay? Everybody matters. Okay? How many of you have supply chains and you bought those supply chains primarily because it was a cost issue? Okay? What happens in those supply chains? Look at Nestlé's supply chains. They're having tremendous problems. Slavery in Thailand, which they've opened up to. Why have they got an incoherent model? Because they're trying to bury slavery in the Ivory Coast. They're trying to hide the issue. Only last week they admitted that they may have slavery in Brazil, that coffee growers may be using slaves. Because we don't know who the farmers are. Starbucks said, we know who our farmers are. Human governance is a bigger thing, okay? But it can only emerge when organisations understand that they're there to serve society and that in order to maximise their value, it's about the people. Okay. How do we link people to value? Well, we've got to start getting, where do people drive value? We have something called the 10 pillars at the Maturity Institute, and I'll just touch upon some of these pretty quickly. We've talked about the value motive or purpose. Whole system. How does an organisation work as a whole system or not? How fragmented is it? Generally, organisations that think of themselves in terms of whole systems drive more value. Arm Holdings in the UK is a fantastically successful technology company, calls its organisation an ecosystem. Okay? It's about understanding how the organisation links together. One of the failings of Microsoft over 10 years under Steve Ballmer was that it was highly fragmented. It was political fiefdoms fighting each other, failing to leverage its own knowledge and know-how. Okay. That moves us on to learning organisations. How do organisations acquire, disseminate and use knowledge? The very best organisation understand that that's fundamental to long-term success. Goldman Sachs is a brilliant learning organisation. It's about how do we get knowledge, how do we share it, how does it connect to value? Toyota's rate of innovation, they measure it as one idea per employee per year. If everybody in the organisation comes up with one idea, that's 100%. They run at 500% plus every year on average. 500% plus ideas that connect to value. Pfizer measured the same thing in 2014, came up with 280 ideas on a workforce of 78,000. Again, do the maths, look at the difference. That's what we talk about when we leverage value, okay? Learning organisation is about knowledge. Improvement philosophy. Is a company there to improve day-to-day, not just in product innovation, not just service innovation, everything. How the lifts work, how reception works, everything. Again, Toyota is obsessive about improvement. Everybody's expected to come with ideas every single day. Risk, people risk. A lot of you will have statements in your annual report saying risk is attraction, retention of key employees. That's just a starting point, right? We know that now. Attracting and retaining key people is just the starting point of value and risk. Why did VW fail? Why did my old organisation, Arthur Andersen, fail, and Enron? Okay, we need to get our heads around what people risk is. Trust, engagement, cooperation, performance system, communication. Communication. Can we measure this? Can you measure the culture of an organisation? Can we measure it? Yes, we can. Okay? We need to look comparatively at different organisations. What are the implications of this? But we need to look, it's not just about science. This is Ed Catmull. There's a great article in the FT about Pixar and Disney, and I suggest it's a really good article. Anyway, in that he says art is about learning to see and observe. That's what we do. As HR professionals, you've got to learn to see and observe what's going on in your organisation. But we need the sciences, we need evidence. Okay? We need evidence from academics, from ourselves. We need to use that to validate what we're seeing, to help us make decisions. Okay, so what we do is about the combination of art and science. When we try to measure our 10 pillars, we're looking for lots of different types of evidence, not proxy metrics. We're looking for qualitative evidence. We're looking for CEO interviews, but we're looking for stats as well. We're looking for anything which sheds light on these things. And when we do that, we have a scale. So at the bottom is our AAA equivalent to a credit rating scale. And really on the left-hand side, we've got organizations which are stage 0 or D, default. They have no interest in professional management of people, all the way through to an organization becomes a whole human governance system. Okay? And there's an important place. This is the important place in the middle, which is our wall. That's where the board and executive do not recognize the potential value of human capital. Okay? So really the important thing is to get the other side. Once you get the other side of the wall, you're in a good place. Okay? I was talking to somebody at the coffee. Context is so important for you to be able to do your jobs well. If you've got leadership, coming back to it, if you've got leadership that don't recognize the potential value of human capital, how hard is your job? Really hard, if not impossible. You're stripping cost out of the business. Okay? If you're on the right-hand side of the wall, and I'm sure Doug will say that Unilever are, they are. Then you've got an opportunity because you can start to show, because your board are open to the idea, you're bringing value to the table. You're not bringing cost reduction to the table. You're saying, I can drive those 4 value variables, and that's going to deliver superior shareholder return. So companies on the right-hand side generally have higher value realization, reduced investment risk, and greater stability, okay? Companies to the left have unrealized value, greater investment, and instability, okay? We're talking like investors now, but we're talking about the human dimension of an organization. Here's our curve. It's a little bit to the right of that these days. But fundamentally, most organizations are on the left. Now, we can get really depressed about that, and I try not to get depressed. The way we say, there's a huge opportunity here. There's a massive, massive opportunity. Okay, there's massive untapped potential. If we can move that curve, even if it's more of a normal distribution, we're going to add huge amounts of value to our organizations and to society. You can go to our website, and there's a live index, and these are the companies that are on it. If you want to talk about these, you can do. Some of them may work for you in the audience. So, Toyota, Admiral, Costco, Handelsbanken. People cringe when I say Goldman Sachs. That's really nasty. Well, yeah, maybe it is. But actually, it really understands how to get value from people. And there's a more honesty at Goldman Sachs. And actually, when you look at societal value, who were the first investment bank to put real money on the table around renewable energy? Who called time on fossil fuels first? Who have just promoted a huge tranche of women to the most senior position within the bank? That didn't happen overnight. That's happened over time. So here what we're saying is human governance drives value, lower risk, and good outcomes. So we can say, well, let's go, if we chase diversity and try and tick boxes, is that the right approach? I would say if we actually create higher management quality, become more effective at human governance, we'll create more diverse organizations. That will be an outcome. We'll create inclusive workplaces. Actually, if we embed human governance, we embrace it, we chase societal value through people, we start to use best and sustainable resource use. We're going to use resources more effectively. We're going to be learning on a learning organization. We're going to have high trust. Handelsbanken can trust their people. The most important person is a branch manager. Huge autonomy given to that person. Our supply chains are not supply chains, they are value chains. Okay, we don't buy suppliers based on cost, we buy them based on value. It's a fundamentally different relationship. How does this affect you? At the moment, you can sit there and say, that's okay, sounds nice. Do I need to do anything about it? Well, things are changing. The investment community, I can tell you certainly in London, there are a number of initiatives to start to demand information from organizations and to start asking questions around these issues. It is not part of an earnings call or an AGM generally. It will start to be. So you can expect to see more, questions around this stuff, around how you report on your human capital, but more importantly, how you manage it. So, there may be an opportunity for you to be slightly ahead of the curve, and rather than wait for the CEO to come to you and say, we need to get to grips with this stuff, we can do that. We're also expanding what we do, and we've got a major project with Harvard who came to us and said, we really like what you do, can you come and do it in the States? So we're going to rate the S&P 500 and do some research around how those ratings link to value. One of the things missing is we've got some good evidence, but we need a lot more of it. Okay. Gina, I'm done.
Stuart, thank you very much. One of the things I'd like to touch on, omservices.com, to find out where your organization or competing organizations may fall on that rankings. I find that incredibly fascinating. One of the things you touched on, and I want to expand it from OM services, from organizational maturity services, also to the Leadership and Talent Institute, is this idea of not just receiving and sharing today, but continuing on those discussions and continuing the collaborations like what you're embarking upon with Harvard. Are there ways then through here, if people here would like to continue the conversations with you or your organization?
Yeah, I mean, we've found it very difficult to go to the C-suite with this kind of approach. Not many organizations want to hold up a mirror to themselves in this way. One of the systemic problems is CEOs, CEO pay. Pat's talking about board level capability around this stuff. Now, one of the things we have to strike a balance is we're not here to name and shame. It's not about that. It's about actually saying, look, there's a huge opportunity. We don't want to embarrass anybody. But the corporate world is, the reason we've gone to investors is the corporate world are slow to pick this up. But if you're interested in looking at it, certainly from, even if it's internal reporting and how you look at these things, how you might be able to raise them at board level. I think that's one of the challenges that HR people is, how on earth do I raise this with the CEO in a way that I'm going to get listened to? I sat with the richest person in Latin America and said, how am I going to get this person's attention? I gave him the Costco Walmart statistic and we sat there for an hour because it just opened up so many conversations about how people generate value. So a little bit of evidence and a little bit of right narrative and suddenly you'll get listened to.
Terrific. Well, you've got the end of it, evidence to quantify that caring does make a difference.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay. Thank you very, very much,
you.
Stuart. Ladies and gentlemen, again, Stuart Woollard.